Well, I bet you're all happy to see me up here again, right? Thanks, Mike. So Mike asked me if I would do this, I think on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday or something. And I was like, yeah, sure, I could probably figure something out by Sunday. And on Friday, I'm already complaining to my wife that I haven't figured out something to talk about. Finally, yesterday, it dawned on me a topic. And as I was putting it together yesterday, I realized the topic was probably worth 3 or 4 sermons, not just one. Now, let me be clear, Mike, that is not an invitation for you to take a sabbatical. But hopefully I'll get through enough of this. It won't sound too disjointed that maybe you'll get some benefit out of it too. Like most sermons that I've done, it's really about me. I can't help it. I guess I'm that kind of selfish guy. But it's really about me. Maybe you can get something out of it too. And just to let you know where I'm coming from, in this one, whenever I talk about learning, one of the things that I have to mention is I am a professional educator at an institution of higher learning here in town, which means I'm aware of lots of the verbiage and language used at the research level of education and educational research. And so I wanted to start off with something that I've mentioned before, but I think we need to have a clear understanding of first, and that is anti-fragility. Now, the word just simply means the capability to thrive and grow as a result of stressors, shocks, volatility, mistakes, faults, or failures. Now, what does that actually mean? That means growth that comes from harms, potential harms. Growth that comes from challenges. Learning that comes about because you are stimulated to learn with a problem. So another way to look at it is it's an optimistic view of a pessimistic world. Okay? You see the world out in front of you, you think it's going to harm you, but if you engage in some of those harmful things, you can move forward in life. Now, this does not sound immediately like a Christian sermon, does it? Why would we seek out the harms? Well, you got to understand what the harms actually mean. And before I get too far, I want to give credit. Anti-fragility is actually a subject originally wrote upon by a person by the name of Nassim Taleb. And I wanted to take this moment because I'm sure it's hardly ever been done in history, but I want to actually quote Nietzsche in a sermon. Now, contrary to Nietzsche's perspective, God is not dead, but he did say something very useful. He said, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." And that goes along with this anti-fragility thing. If it doesn't kill us, if it doesn't harm us to the point of complete loss, we can grow from it. And now as we're thinking about anti-fragility, as we're thinking about people who are benefited from challenges they've experienced, there are many people in the Bible that we could go to. The most obvious, perhaps, Job. I mean, who's had more challenges than Job, right? But what happened at the end of the book of Job? He got more back. He was better off in the end. He's more faithful, and he was able to move forward in his life. But we don't have to go to Job. We can go to a couple of other obvious people. We can go to Peter. Now you might be wondering, okay, now I see the connection. Peter. Yeah, Peter made a few mistakes, didn't he? So let's talk about one. In Mark chapter 8, verses 31 to 33, it talks about how Peter rebuked Jesus. Now imagine this for a moment, okay? Rebuking Jesus. Would any of us presume to do that? Peter did. So let's think about it. In Mark 8, chapter 31, chapter 8, verses 31 to 33, it says, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days arise from the dead." And he was stating the matter plainly. Jesus was. "And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him." Jesus, turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's purposes, but on man's." Whew. Okay, well, Jesus personally tells you that you're being Satan in this process, that you're being his adversary. That's kind of a strong condemnation there, right? I would call Peter's move a mistake. So, of course, naturally, that means Peter should fall away from faith and never follow Jesus again, right? Of course, that's not what that means. That means he made a mistake. Guess what the best way to learn is? By making mistakes. Now, you don't go and set out to make mistakes, but when you make them, you use them to learn. That is how we get past. That's how we become stronger with anti-fragility. We use our mistakes, our faults, and our failures to improve. But Peter wasn't done with that. Peter's had a very interesting life. Peter said to Jesus in John chapter 13, verses 8 to 10, he said, "Never shall you wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no place with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said, "He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, otherwise he is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you." Now that "but not all of you" was not referring to Peter. We now know that. That was referring to Judas. But what's interesting about this is Peter made two mistakes right in a row. He's quick on his feet. He's going to really say what he thinks. But then the problem with that is you make mistakes kind of quickly, don't you? So he said, "You shouldn't wash my feet." Well, if Jesus was saying that he needs to wash your feet, I think we should trust in him. Just my opinion, perhaps. But then after Jesus said, "If I don't wash your feet, you have no part and place with me," Simon Peter went to the opposite extreme. He said, "Fine, wash all of me." Now the point was he wanted to be with Jesus. He wanted to be a true follower of Jesus. The problem is he wasn't understanding the point, and so he made the mistake. And of course, Jesus took care of that little challenge. But that wasn't it for Peter. Peter made an even bigger challenge, one that actually did make him feel fallen away. See, Jesus had predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times before the rooster would crow. And after the 3rd time, speaking from Luke chapter 22, verses 60 to 62, Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about," referring to someone who said he was there with Jesus. And immediately, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. And then the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had told him, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now, Peter spent a long time with Jesus. We know he followed him religiously, you might say. We only have a few instances of the things that he said and the things that Jesus has said. We don't have the entire 3 years worth of time, all, several zeros after the 1 seconds that Jesus spent in his ministry, in his earthly ministry. But what we do know is we have 3 instances of significant mistakes made by Peter. And yet, Peter has become, by the end of his life, he was a leader in Jerusalem, and he had given his life for the faith. But at first, after he denied him 3 times, he felt that mistake was too much to overcome. After Jesus arose and became manifest to the apostles again, Jesus directly speaks to Peter. So at the Sea of Tiberias, or Galilee, Jesus has breakfast with Peter and 6 others, following a night of fishing. Actually tells Peter to lay down the net, or tells them to lay down the net on the right side of the boat, and they shall catch fish. And I believe one of the accounts says 153 fish were caught. Now, in my fishing experience, if I catch 1 fish, I am thrilled. 153 with a net. That's kind of impressive at the end of a night when they're rowing back in. But he says in verses 15 to 17 of, I believe this is Luke 21, I think. I don't have that written down, but we'll go with it anyway. It's verses 15 to 17 of something. He says, "Now when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Tend my lambs.' He said to him again a second time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Shepherd my sheep.' And then Jesus said to him a third time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Peter was hurt because he said to him a third time, 'Do you love me?' And he said to him, 'Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Tend my sheep.'" For each one of the denials, Jesus offered recompense. "Do you love me? Then tend my lambs. Do you love me? Then shepherd my sheep. Do you love me? Tend my sheep." All 3 denials gracefully overcome with 3 affirmations. This is what Jesus has to offer us in learning. We'll make mistakes, but he offers us the grace of coming back from those mistakes with greater responsibility and understanding. Now, that's just Peter. I mean, don't get me wrong. Peter was a great choice for this, right? Because he's made several mistakes that we know about and then ended up very, very nicely in the whole scheme of things, I would say. Maybe not the easiest way to end your life, perhaps, but I think the crown he got afterwards was well worth it. Paul can also has his own challenges. Now, Paul, for us, we know Paul. Paul was Saul. Saul persecuted Christians. Paul was forever asking forgiveness for this, I should say, till the end of his life. I believe he would constantly pray about this. He certainly felt bad about it. But he tells the Corinthians in a letter, he says, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not despairing. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Stuck down, but not destroyed." What is he saying? Well, he's saying we're all struggling in some way. And it's not just our own fault. But we use that to become better. Because with Jesus can help us turn our mistakes into valuable learning lessons. Now, Paul is a great one to also consider for the idea of awareness. You see, making mistakes, the sins that occur after we become Christians, what they do is they help hone our senses to see the mistakes, to see the sins that we make, to learn from them and grow so that we can see the smaller mistakes that we make, and one by one remove them from our lives. In Romans, Paul says, I would not have come to know sin except through the law. Now, of course, he means Old Testament law. But the same idea is true. Without putting our heart towards following Christ, it's very difficult to recognize the common everyday sins that people have. How are you going to recognize it in yourself? And moreover, as we know from Jesus, you shouldn't focus on the speck in someone else's eye. Focus on the log that's in your own eye. We easily look past the things that we do wrong and then point out the small details of those around us. But by becoming a Christian, by working towards the Christian faith, by learning, we are able to know sin better so that we can avoid it. And you might think, okay, well, I know when I first became a Christian, one of my first thoughts was, oh, so this means I'm perfect now, I should not have any sin on my soul, and I will never have sin again in my life. And I don't know how long that lasted, but I would say you could measure it in a time unit smaller than a day. I had my troubles. I still have my troubles today. Turns out, working to get past our troubles, overcoming our mistakes, and letting them build us up into something greater is a daily problem, if not more often. We know it's a daily problem because that's literally what we have been told. Luke tells us, Jesus says, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Now, do you think he was joking about daily? I don't. It is a daily struggle sometimes, especially if you're not a morning person. Sorry, hon. So, learning from our mistakes, we can take our first steps towards awareness of faith in God's plan and start trying to walk along the path that we can recognize in God's plan. And our awareness helps us recognize our own pride, which hopefully helps to keep us from becoming stagnant in our faith. Paul then also says in a letter to Romans, he says, talking about liberty that we have as Christians, what shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin so that grace may increase? May never be. We're not looking for the sins. They're already there. Oftentimes, we just don't know that they're there because we haven't been aware of them. Now, as we learn, it takes practice. I know many students in a physics class that have attempted to learn the entire semester's worth of material right before the final exam. And I'm going to tell you right now, those students do not do well. Learning takes practice. It takes imperfection. And with practice, what's the old saying? Practice makes perfect. Right? Now, in this case, I want to point out, perfect doesn't mean we'll never make a mistake. Perfect means we're complete. We understand what we need to know. We understand how to make up for the sins we accidentally make. and that we're working towards that higher goal of being with God. Only Jesus was perfect. We're not. But we don't need to be. We just need to be closer to Jesus. And for this to work, you can't be alone. You can't be by yourself. I mean, you can sit in a room and pray to Jesus, but what you also need is other people to help you along your journey. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. It's very difficult to learn on your own. Those who have tried to take an online course that was improperly set up know this. But we don't have to learn on our own here. We need each other. And this community is great for helping us to sharpen our understanding. The nearer you draw to the Lord, the more you see his perfection, and the more you can see your own imperfections. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Helps keep you humble. I hope. I hope it's working for me that way. But we're always looking with the goal of his perfections in mind. Now, I've said all this, and I know I'm actually running long. I told you this could easily roll into 4 sermons. But I want to point out that we are all the church. We are, in fact, the living stones that are involved in this church. And we know, hopefully all of us, just about all of us, have that personal relationship with the chief cornerstone. Of course, we recognize in Matthew 16, verse 18, talking to Peter, Peter gets his name, Peter. Why? Because Peter means rock. He says, I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Now, what did Peter say to get that moniker? Well, Peter said, you are the Son of God. It's really not that hard. That's the great starting point. From there, we simply need to learn. Peter then tells us in 1 Peter, he talks, as also mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts, that Jesus is the choice, cornerstone. He says, chapter 2, verses 4-7, he says, and coming to him as to a living stone which has been rejected by people, but is choice and precious in the sight of God, you also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices that are acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For this is contained in Scripture. Behold, I am laying in Zion a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and the one who believes in him will not be put to shame. The precious value, Peter continues, the precious value then is for you who believe, but for unbelievers, a stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. Now, what does this all mean? Well, this is talking about how we're all a part of this church. We're all the foundation. Well, Jesus is the chief cornerstone of the foundation, right? But we built a foundation of our understanding, and we are the walls, and we are the roof, and we are all parts of this building that help everyone else in this building maintain over the years. That's the learning that we need to be able to do over time. And we use the choice cornerstone, the chief cornerstone, Jesus, to do it. But now when you first became a Christian, did you fit in to the building very well? And I don't mean walking through the doors. No, you might have felt out of place at times. There might have been some awkwardness to it, rough edges that needed to be chipped away. Just like any blockhead, like myself, had some ideas that needed to be taken away, had some feelings that didn't need to be there. And over time, I found a place a place where I can fit in, a stone in a wall that requires no mortar. Now, I don't know how the Incans did this, but they actually produced walls like this in Machu Picchu and Pumapunku. I hope I've pronounced those correctly. But these walls don't have any mortar between the stones. And modern engineers today don't have a great understanding of how they did this. They have some ideas. Maybe some were correct ideas, but they have no real understanding of the work it required for this. And I'm going to tell you right now, for us to fit in this building without mortars between us, without the mortar between us as living stones, some of us probably had to have some edges shaved, sanded down so we fit properly. But there's one place in that wall that each of us fits. That place was designed for us. And even though we might have had to chip away at some of the excess that we didn't need, wasn't useful to our lives, we can fit in that stone together and become one church together. Now, at this point, I'm definitely going along, so I'm going to try to speed it up here and just talk a little bit more about growth. Growth requires a good mindset. You have to be ready to grow. You have to be ready to take on the challenges. A growth mindset can be helpful. Learning from your mistakes, improving by working hard, never giving up, determined to do your best. Don't forget self-reflection. That, of course, is extremely important. You shouldn't talk to Jesus without maybe reflecting a little bit on what you need to work on, maybe, be humble at least with him. But you can overcome the challenges. Even if it takes effort, you can still overcome the challenges. And most importantly, you can train your brain. You see, training your brain is so important that your brain naturally gets trained on everything you do. The problem is, before you're a Christian, it may be trained the wrong way. You may have a wheelbarrow problem, or a wagon problem, as some might say it, where the ruts of the wheels are so deep it's hard to get the wagon or the wheelbarrow out of those ruts. That's what we need to do to break those bad habits that we have. And some of those bad habits are lifelong. On the plus side, we can make those same ruts in a positive way. We can make habits that help us think differently, that help us to focus on the good things. In Philippians 4:8, the writer tells us, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if any worthy of praise, think about these things." Now, why? Why should we think about those things? Because they make us happy. It does, but that's not the reason why. The reason why is the more we think of the positive, the more we think of the good things that God has helped us with, that God has provided for us, the more we train our brain to think in positive ways. That growth mindset helps us become better Christians. Now, in some cases, we will fail. There is some assembly required. But even technology recognizes that sometimes a failure can lead to success. I love this picture. And yes, I have seen this personally when working on Windows XP computers. By the way, Windows 11 does this too. So whenever you see it, just take a snapshot and send it to your friends. Haha, I failed successfully. But you know what? As Christians, we will have failures from time to time. It doesn't mean falling away. It doesn't mean apostasy. It means we just need to correct the failure so that we can be successful in the long run. Don't worry so much about the battles, but win the war with faith. I shouldn't say with. I should say the war using faith. How about that? Now, in this process, of course, some assembly required, so I'm also going to point out that while we're all bricks in this wall, you have to remember that things don't always go as planned. It may not go at the time frame you want it. In fact, I've yet to meet a Christian that says, man, I came to the faith quickly and with strength, and I just stayed here and I didn't have any problems. Most Christians I know will tell you, no, it's a struggle. Sometimes I do extremely well. Sometimes I feel like I just walked off a cliff. But every day, I get up and try again. Remember, we have to take up our cross daily. Be a Christian every day, not just the good times, and not just the bad. So some might think, why am I taking so long to get better? Well, if you look over your day, you'll think, well, I did well there, and I could have done better there, but it doesn't feel like much of a change. You look at your past week, you might feel the same way. Not much of a change. You might even look at your last year and say, well, I haven't changed very much. But after 10 years, and at this point, I'm coming up on almost 20 years of being a Christian, and I can say what I was on the very last day of 2006 when I was baptized and began formally my approach to Jesus to try to walk his path. I'm not the person I was back then. We recently took a vacation, and in part of the vacation we stopped in Terre Haute, Indiana, where Amy and I met. Told our kids about all sorts of stories, most of which they probably rolled their eyes at. But we told stories about things that I would never do today, that I did back then. Stupid things. Yeah, I was stupid once. Sometimes I'm probably stupid today, every now and then. But I've learned since then. The faith has made me stronger, and with practice, we advance. But in the end, I have to remember, I am a part of this church. I'm a part of Jesus' church. Which means that while I like to think that the potter had formed me into this most beautiful vase, I must recognize that perhaps instead I was made into a plate or a bowl, because that's what the need is. That's the learning that we get over time, finding our place in life, in the church, and figuring out where to go from there. So finally, as you're looking back over your years and thinking about how you improved, if you don't see something, I tell you right now, you should look at 4 things. See if one of them has improved. Love, humility, trust in the Lord, and obedience to his word. I would bet that all of you have improved in at least one of those things in the last year. And if you haven't, it's a perfect chance to make a resolution, a mid-year resolution, to do so. Because our lives are not done. We have ways to continue learning and growing in the faith. So there's a quote, and I pulled from one of the resources I was reading to prepare for this, and I'm just going to say it's by Jerry Bridges. I have no idea who Jerry Bridges is. I have no idea his religion. I've already used Nietzsche in this sermon, so I'm pretty sure it can't be much worse. But he says, Scripture speaks of both a holiness which we have in Christ before God, and a holiness which we are to strive after. God has made provision for us to live holy, but he has also given us definite responsibility to pursue holiness. Only as we accept our responsibility and appropriate God's provisions will we make any progress in our pursuit of holiness. So we may be working from a salvation perspective, even if we have already made the commitment to let Jesus save us. We need to remember that there's more that we can do. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret that I find is true from at least myself. The meaning of life is to learn and to become better than you were before. I'd like to say that being a Christian taught me that. Sounds pretty good, in fact. I think I will say that. But even if it hadn't, it certainly is a Christian virtue. Now, if you need help, if you're looking back on your last year and you had these four things and you say, well, I can't really see how the love increased, the humility improved, the trust improved, or your obedience improved. If you can't see those things, all's not lost. We can help you. There are things that can be done. So if you need that help, then I recommend that you come forward as we stand and sing.